Hello and welcome to the Inspired Business Media channel. Today I'm joined by the CMO of JLL, Francesco Federico. Francesco, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to dive into your career to date and learn a bit more about you.
Hi, Miriam. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So let's start at the very beginning to give our listeners, our viewers, a taste of what you've done to get where you are today. So tell us a little bit about your career to date so far.
Well, it's been for sure an unconventional journey. I started off literally selling some GPS navigators. I remember back in my days when I was still in high school, and then throughout my university career, I always kept sort of a keen interest into all things tech. Although I initially wanted to become a lawyer and I studied law, I graduated in law, I decided fairly quickly that I actually wanted to pursue a career in marketing. And so I basically evolved what I was already doing, and I founded a very small digital marketing boutique agency based in Milan. And what I was doing at the time, literally as a one-man band show, really, was knocking at the doors of restaurants, hotels in the city, and offering them to, put together a website and their whole digital strategy. And as I said, sort of a turnkey package. Then the business evolved. I got some partners in, and together with them, I founded also a couple of startups. One based in my native Milan in Italy, and another here in London. Sort of this way, I spent like most of a good part of 5 to 6 years, literally playing around with this digital marketing consulting firm and a couple of startups. And then in 2009, I got probably noticed in the market, and a headhunter called, and I was offered a role at Vodafone Italy. And so I decided to accept. And since then, I've been working in large multinational companies. And I think my time at Vodafone has been extraordinary because I was very lucky to join at a time of tremendous change, when over the tops were eating up all the profit margins of telecommunication companies. And so companies like Vodafone were looking at sort of innovative ways to reclaim the relationship with the customer base. And so they, among many things, what we did was launching an application for smartphone and tablet, My Vodafone. And I did that for Vodafone Italy. And then since we were the first operating company doing that, I was then asked to come here to London and expand the experience, the Italian experience, the My Vodafone app across 8 operating companies, which was my first regional role, incredibly exciting. And then I left Vodafone for a 1 year of sort of consulting, a stint in consulting for clients like Sky and Google, where very much I sort of brought what I learned at Vodafone, and I helped Sky and Google again leverage the digital channels to nurture the relationship with their existing clients. And then in 2013, I joined Acer, the computer manufacturer, in my first global role, my first global digital marketing role. It was incredibly exciting because I was for most of my time based out of Taipei in Taiwan. Incredible experience, not just for the global role, not just obviously for the strong footprint that we had in APAC. And so I really had the opportunity to learn how marketing is done in APAC, but also because it was my first my first role that was sort of fully focused on customer acquisition. So up until then, I was very much focused more on customer retention and CRM. Acer was all about acquiring new customers. And then in 2016, I joined JLL as digital marketing director for the European region. Then I moved on to a global role, and now recently I picked up the sort of fully integrated role of head of marketing and comms for the UK and Ireland.
Wow, that's quite a journey you've been on.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know, because you mentioned that you started while you did your degree in law, and that's potentially what you were going to go into. That seems like quite a shift for someone on the outside going from law to marketing. What kind of prompted you to pursue a career in marketing as opposed to becoming a lawyer or a solicitor?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. I think that, think in part it was to the fact that the story of my life has always been about change. I really, since I was a little boy, I really loved change. I like trying new things. And I think studying law, I realized that although I really loved the discipline, the actual job of a lawyer is probably not set in the most dynamic and sort of change-driven environments. And so I was probably naturally drawn into market because marketing is, at the end of the day, all about change. But I think I do think I never completely left what I sort of loved and learned about the law profession, because if you think about it, a good lawyer has sort of very good dialectic and rhetoric. I think those are probably the two main qualities that the lawyer has to have, to debate the cause, the case in a court of law. And I think that's very similar to a marketeer. A marketeer has to win an argument, has to create a positive tension that then generates change through a positive and compelling argument. So I think it's pretty much the other way around. Like, a good lawyer is probably first and foremost a very good communicator, but equally for you to be a good marketeer, a good communicator, you need to probably have some of the skills that a lawyer would have. So I do think that the two things are pretty close.
That is a really interesting parallel when you put it like that. And I guess that goes for a lot of people that maybe study a certain subject or a certain discipline at degree level and then go into something that seems completely different. But when you break it down, there are so many transferable skills and, character attributes from studying one thing to go to another. That's really, really interesting. So coming back to kind of your career and the journey you've been on, what has been the biggest challenge that you faced in your career to date, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Well, I think looking back, probably coming to terms with what we usually refer to as office politics has definitely been one of the biggest challenges, especially at the beginning of my career. And that's probably because I was coming from a boutique digital marketing agency, a startup really, where 4 partners and literally 2 employees. So fairly, very, very small environment, and catapulted into a global company with thousands of employees. Naturally, those corporate environments are intrinsically more political. And I think at the beginning I struggled, first of all, understanding the complexity. And secondly, I think I had to overcome a bias I had, probably again coming from a startup environment, that office politics was bad. Office politics was a bad thing. And actually, if you think about it, even Aristotle said, thousands of years ago that, human beings are political animals. So it's not good or bad. It's more like what you do of it. It's human nature, especially when you are put in a large society that is governed by formal and informal rules. You have to play politics in order to fit in and establish your role. And it doesn't have to be negative. And I think very often we have we give a negative connotation to the word office politics. And so one of the ways I sort of overcome is, first of all, by understanding the importance of mastering the rules of the corporate society, and making sure that you understood all those informal and formal relationships between colleagues, and then leverage office politics in a good way. And that was, for instance, sometimes mean even maybe go down the route of some tactical decisions, but to the benefit of a North Star, of a great good. So when I now mentor people coming into the company, especially graduates that come from university directly into the corporate world, I always tell them you need to have in your mind very clearly a North Star, that is the good thing that you want to achieve, your big goal within the next few years. And then you need to build a roadmap on how you will get there. And it might very well be that one of these steps in this roadmap is maybe, do something tactical for the business, maybe a marketing initiative. We know it's not going to be like the best marketing campaign ever, but if that activation gets trust of that particular stakeholder, then you will have developed a trust relationship that will enable you the day after to do maybe something better, something bigger, that is proper marketing, and that will get you closer the North Star. So I think, again, office politics is not good or bad, is as good as bad as you make it. And I think by keeping your eyes on the end goal, the North Star, you can actually play the game in a way that is beneficial, not just for you, but also for your team and for the company at large.
That's fascinating. And I'd imagine that the people you've mentored will really benefit from kind of seeing your journey and you going through it and having that kind of real world experience of how to navigate, as you say, those office politics and how to navigate your career as well. So that brings me on to my next question for you, which is kind of contrast to the biggest challenge. What's been your biggest achievement, would you say, in your career to date?
Well, I think there have been many campaigns, many innovations, many marketing activations that I've been sort of very proud of. But definitely, if I have to sort of single out one achievement, I will definitely look at my team, at the people I work with, because I think that yes, you might be like the best marketeer in the world, and I launch a campaign that will make a dent in history, like Steve Jobs' 1984. A campaign that was, still has been studied at university and still it's an iconic campaign. So you might very well, go down that path. But I think that you need to be prepared for the eventuality that you will not go down that path. And so the question is, okay, if I look back in a few decades, if I look back at my career, what is that I want to be remembered for? And for me, the answer is for the way I work with people and what I left to the people, how I enabled them, to be better professionals, better individuals. And so I always pay a lot of time into mentoring and coaching, not just my immediate team in the company I work for, but in general also, I run a lot of sort of mentorship initiatives and help out graduates coming into the work life. And the reason for that is because I think the compound, it's almost like an investment that you can't go wrong with. The compound interest of spending time with all these people really amplifies the impact that my ideas and the things I think and my theories around marketing, etc. There is no better way to amplify those than by working with and inspiring people around you. So when I see people, for instance, progressing in their career, getting in a recognition inside and outside the company I work for, that's where I think, okay, now I have achieved something. I have left, I have made a dent into someone else's life, into someone else's company, and I can see, that impact propagating exponentially.
That's a really fascinating answer, because I bet a lot of people, their immediate thought would go to, I don't know what awards they've won or what campaigns they've done, or kind of more tangible achievements. But to put your achievement to your team and the people you work with, that's really interesting. And I think you're right, and that goes for a lot of industries. Success is great, but you can't achieve it by yourself. You've got to surround yourself with people that, have a positive influence and can help you get there. And then in turn, you can help those people achieve success as well. That's really fascinating. I'd really like to come on to how you've kind of navigated the pandemic as a marketeer. Obviously, marketeers had no choice during the pandemic but to pivot a lot of their strategies and their customer messaging. So from JLL's perspective, how did you do this in order to be responsible and sensitive about your messaging during that time?
Yeah, you're right. It's been definitely an extraordinary year, 2020, and I think I was obviously in the tragedy. I was lucky enough to see the pandemic in sort of two different roles, because it started when I was still in global digital marketing, and then in the second half of this, as we were coming out of the pandemic, I picked up the sort of CMO role for the UK and Ireland, and I think what we were really careful at the beginning, and I'm seeing this, with a global hat on, was on making sure that we did not overstep in territories that were not ours. And I think, by the way, this applies not just to the pandemic, but to any social cause or social issue. It's very important that brands stay very close to their ethos, what they stand from, what is that are all about, and avoid trying to own in spaces that don't belong to them. And I think in the pandemic, we have seen many brands, many of them, I would say, complete with goodwill at heart, but consumers don't forgive anything in this era of like hyper-informed consumers. They know everything. They understand immediately whether what you're saying as a brand, what you're doing as a brand comes from a place of authenticity, or whether it comes from a place of tacticism and you're doing it just because everybody's doing it. And so back to JLL, what we did is, again, avoiding any space that was not ours and focusing on what we're doing best. And for instance, there were areas of our business that were naturally deeply involved with sort of solving and helping out with the pandemic. For instance, we have a portion of our business that is responsible for facility management for the biggest brands you can think of. We're managing their buildings, we're managing their facilities, their industrial logistics properties, for instance. And so we unearthed those stories, those heroes of, for instance, facility managers that were the only ones left in a building completely deserted by lockdowns. So imagine these entire office blocks completely empty, but we still had to have one person there to make sure that the building, the essentials of the buildings were still safe, because we're living a complicated world. You can't simply leave an office block as you would leave your home. You need to make sure everything is secure. And so we unearthed those human stories of people that in the midst of the pandemic, where everybody were locked up, they were not locked up at home, they were locked up in the office. And similarly, we told stories of hope when, for instance, we organized a visit in a Pfizer factory in the US when President Biden was just elected, and visited the factory to see how the vaccination production was going on. And again, we were the facility, the contractor there. And again, we unearthed the true story. It was not something built for a marketing campaign. It was happening. It was true. It was over there. It was sort of dealt by us. And so we built a narrative around how JLL was actually doing their best to help out. And in some cases, we hyper-localized. For instance, in the UK, where obviously was a strong focus on the immense effort the NHS was going through. We partnered with our clients and we connected them with the NHS to ensure they were providing parking facilities for all key workers throughout, the key months of, 2020, the height of the pandemic. So it's, again, unearthing true stories of things that belong to us without trying to get into areas that didn't belong to us. And I think you touched in your question on a second part that was incredibly important, and that was making sure we were relevant throughout. And that proved very difficult, especially towards the end of last year, because the reopening and I would say the way out of the pandemic proved to be very different across geographies. Even within Europe, you would have like completely different timing in terms of the vaccine, for instance, take up, how many people are getting the jab, or simply how quickly variants are spreading. And so countries that are reopening, countries that are closing. And so it was incredibly important from a global digital marketing perspective to make sure that we were staying true to the main narrative, but also that we adopted, words of enthusiasm and optimism in those specific markets where we see we're getting out of the pandemic, while sticking to a narrative of hope and obviously, closeness to those people and to those countries where, the progress was still sort of not enough to, call it, okay, we want it. And so, and this is still ongoing, and you still have that, almost weekly, if not daily in certain cases, adjustment of the narrative, because you need to make sure that you are relating with the audience you're talking to. And that has proven obviously very difficult, because you need to accommodate 90 plus markets, multiple languages, et cetera. So very, 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 very tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, you're juggling so many things there. You're juggling responsibility, sensitivity, being genuine, and then also keeping up with changes, not, as you said, not only in the UK, but across the board, where a lot of the messaging has been very confusing for a lot of people. So I can imagine that was a real challenge. But I think you, like many other people, you mentioned certain brands not being authentic, not being genuine with their messaging. And I think it sounds like JLL have taken the perfect approach with highlighting those real stories. Like you said, you weren't having to make anything up. It was there. It was all just shedding a light on those people. And it's interesting. We always think about, you know, key workers during this pandemic, and immediately we think of the doctors and nurses at the forefront, which of course are incredible. But then I feel like a lot of us have forgotten the people, as you said, those kind of facility managers that are staying in offices while nobody's there. And I think it's amazing that you've shed a light on those people. Really, really interesting. So you've talked a lot about the power of hybrid customer experiences to elevate brands and develop meaningful storytelling. And I think that's what you've done during the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit more about how to put this into practice, and how marketeers can put these values at the forefront of kind of their strategies?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, I would say to all marketeers and people that are considering whether or not to start a career in marketing is that there's never been a better time to be in marketing. I mean, it's incredible the things we can do and how marketing has changed in the last few years, and the amount of change it still is, you know, before us. So it's incredible time to be in marketing. But we have to remember that the basics have not changed. So it's still all about storytelling. It has always been all about storytelling. I think the difference is today you need to sort of scale the story to reach, you know, your viable audience, and sort of unpack the story across all the touch points, because consumers are everywhere. You know, they are on their mobile phone, they are on their work computer, at home watching streaming and on-demand TV, etc., etc. So it's still all about storytelling, but it's how about you slice and dice it in order to be successful. And so I think there are three, I think, for me, North Stars I look at. One is, again, the ethos of the brand. So be true to yourself as a brand. Never move away from the core essence of the brand ethos. And that requires sometimes lots of time to be found, and it's a worthwhile exercise. You know, I think sometimes we underestimate the power and the importance of a brand. You know, it's not just about the logo. It's about everything that's around it. You know, the values. And I really like the word ethos, because I think it really encapsulates everything that brands need to understand about itself. So once you have that, always be true to that ethos. I think the other important element is consistency, and that is very important, especially at the time of continuous change. It is reassuring to look up to a brand that is consistent in the messaging, which doesn't mean never change. Of course, we need to change. As I said, marketeers thrive in a change environment. But it's important that once you have nailed your sort of marketing narrative, we have something to say about the service or product, then you say that consistently across all the touch points. You know, you don't say different things depending on the touch point. And finally, probably most importantly in 2021, it's relevance. And relevance is not necessarily, sometimes I think we think about relevance when we think about someone. It's like, this message needs to be relevant to you. That's not enough anymore. The relevance it means that it needs to be relevant to you in that specific moment. So you might be commuting, you might be looking at your phone, at your Instagram stream. The message needs to be relevant to that use case. That is going to be different where you, as the same exact individual, get into the office and start working on your work PC. That's the user case is different. You are the same person, but the moment is different, and so the message needs to be articulated differently. And I think these are the three things that needs to be done, articulated properly. Be true to yourself as a company, really understand your ethos, be consistent across the execution, and leverage technology, which is, again, why I say it's never been a better time to be marketing, because the technology enables us literally to do endless possibilities in marketing activation and execution. And now customers expect this, relevancy to be there. And that's why I'm saying it's incredibly important to be relevant throughout the journey.
Really interesting. It's almost like going back to basics in a way, but really mastering those, because I think many marketeers probably forget those along the way, getting tied up in, I don't know, different creative ideas or trying to keep on brand with, trying to keep up to date with certain things that are happening. And sometimes it is about just stripping it back and kind of sitting back and going, right, what are we trying to get out of this? What's our messaging? What's our ethos? What message do we want to put out there to the world, and how do we want to place ourselves? Really interesting. So you've had various leadership roles within marketing. You mentioned your really extensive career at the start of this video and podcast. So what would you say are kind of the main pillars of what makes a good leader?
Well, obviously, I think there are many qualities that a good leader should possess. I think the one I would single out is probably around the customer and being customer obsessed. And the reason why I mentioned this quality in particular is because I think as a marketeer, it becomes probably natural when you are in your early days of your career to be obsessed with the customer, because you are so close to it. You are in the trenches, you are running focus groups, you are sometimes even literally talking to customers themselves, and you are naturally drawn into what customers want and think, and you implement all of that in your sort of marketing campaign and execution. I think as a leader, there is a risk as you progress in your career, and as we touched also earlier about the team and the importance of teamwork, etc. The more you grow your career, the less it's going to be about your functional knowledge and expertise, and the more it becomes about your general management skills. And that's absolutely fine. That's what's required with the job. But there is a risk as a marketeer, as a CMO, that you end up into so many conversations that you lose touch with the customer, because everything is being fed to you. Agencies feed quarterly reports, your team feeds you updates at the staff meetings, etc. But you, as a marketing leader, are not necessarily in touch directly with the customer, and that's where I think it becomes a little bit tricky. Because you start losing touch with reality, with what's going on in the market. And so I think what I always try to do, and I encourage my team and everyone, to do, is to go out there and meet the customer. Pop by if your company, for instance, has retail stores. Just, go in the store, for a day, or buy a product or a service from your company, and see what the customer experience is. And obviously, without revealing yourself, almost like running your own anecdotal sort of shadow, sort of mystery visit. But it's incredibly important, because those anecdotes probably by themselves obviously are not enough to derive the entire marketing plan for the year. But there will be very important dots of information that you can then connect with other things that you're being told within the organization, and they will give you more awareness of what the customer really wants. So yeah, that's, I think, for me the main quality that a leader should maintain. And if you think it just goes beyond marketing, if you read sort of many biographies of successful CEOs, every single biography you read them, visiting the local offices, factories, talking with customers. It's really embedded in the DNA of leaders who want to be effective in their decision making, to really stay very close to the end user, whoever they may be. Maybe the customer, maybe the internal customer. You really need to be close to the end user.
That's really fascinating to kind of go back to basics, because I imagine that it's hard as a leader for a big company like you are, to kind of fall into the trap of being disconnected with your customer. So it makes sense. It makes complete sense to kind of, as you say, go into the store, go into the office, have that touch point with the customer, and really kind of hone in on your messaging and make sure that you're still delivering what you should be delivering. Fascinating. Now, you've described yourself as a passionate advocate for sustainability, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. And you've run several industry-first initiatives to address climate change and highlight the importance of equal opportunities in the workplace. So what practical advice would you give to other leaders to ensure that these values are at the forefront of their leadership?
Well, I would say, to put it simply, I would say walk the talk. And I think, again, back to, there's never been a better time to be in marketing. I think we have no excuses in marketing, especially if we think about D&I for instance. Very often we say, when there is a lack of career progression for and then you end up with boards that are not diverse at all, or you have a company that's not inclusive at all. And sometimes one of the the reason provided behind this is because we don't have a pipeline. We don't have a pipeline of candidates that are senior enough. And it might be true in some cases, but my point is, in marketing, it's never true. I mean, in marketing, if you really want to, it's a profession. And just look at my own story. I mean, I studied law, ended up in marketing. So it's a profession that it's a skill that you can acquire, you can grow, regardless of your background, regardless of any particular barrier. And I think as a marketeer, especially as a leader, if you truly believe in sort of the D&I agenda, you need to walk the talk. And what I mean by that is, for instance, that in every company I've been, I always make sure that first of all, that the marketing team is a beacon, is literally setting the example for what D&I actually means in everything. And not just and don't talk just about the standard metrics, but also the behaviors and the sort of infuse a positive ethics that everybody within the company would say, oh yes, the marketing team is literally. In simple terms, it's reflecting society, because at the end of the day, this is what D&I should be all about. It's not about quotas, it's not about KPIs, it's about making sure that you look inside at your team and you look out of the window and you see that there is a reflection of the society. And again, there is no excuse. There might be an excuse in other areas because, and I'm not saying in bad faith, good faith excuses where it might be difficult. There might be lots of barriers why career progression is difficult, and so you end up with non-diverse teams, etc. But that's fine, but not in marketing. So a marketing leader has, first of all, to walk the talk, make sure the marketing team is a beacon for D&I, and then the next step is, I think, to try to be a force for change within the organization. And for instance, one thing that I do is I always create what I call a shadow board, which essentially is I sort of pick up junior team members across the organization outside of marketing. So I'm looking at support functions, I'm looking at the core business, and I sort of put together a group of 10, 15 people that obviously regularly gets sort of refreshed and changed, that sort of be, as I said, sort of a marketing shadow board. And what they essentially do is they join monthly or quarterly meetings in which the marketing team tells them what we are up to, what marketing is all about, what our sort of success is, and where we need maybe their help and the help of the business lines. And they also tell us, what's going on in the business lines, what the business lines are telling them about marketing, what's the feeling. So it's incredibly interesting because, first of all, it's good for the company, because we, as in marketing, get almost these, if you want, informants, spread all over the organization that tell us what the business wants from us. Sometimes they even tell us that maybe the business won't tell some things to us to our face, but we get to know those things bottom up thanks to this shadow board. And it's great for us because we can inform them. And so rather than just talking to the business leaders, we actually talk with the teams. And that then obviously brings what marketing is doing and all the the good things we're doing. It's a sort of almost a bottom-up evangelization of the organization. So it's good for the company, but it's also good for the D&I. Why? Because obviously in building this shadow marketing board, we make sure the board is incredibly, as I said, diverse, it reflects society. And so we are essentially indirectly arming them with pieces of knowledge that no one of their peers or immediate superiors know about, because in an organization, usually leadership marketing team would talk with leaders in the business, not necessarily with all the ranks down into the business and product lines. And so this way, you're actually empowering junior members of the business to know more than their bosses and their boss's boss about marketing communications. And naturally, what then happens over time is that they become informal holders of knowledge. And we all know from organizational design that those people that informally know more than others are seen as sources of information. And so people go to them, and we all know very well that information is power. So long story short, through the shadow marketing board, you're empowering those junior individuals in the business to be to have almost like an additional shift to their arsenal, if you want, and be recognized and seen within the business. And so hopefully, obviously, we don't we're not arrogant to think that thanks to this, we will rocket fuel their career, but we're simply giving them one token, something more to go to have in their career progression, and hopefully this will help getting noticed, getting visibility, and then finally progressing their career and ultimately reducing that problem that we have in some areas, that is, we don't have the pipeline.
That's really, really interesting. And I think a key word that I picked up on there while you were discussing that was empowering, like kind of empowering people to have that information and move up the ranks or move to a different discipline. You're kind of putting power in people's hands, which is a really beautiful thing, especially in a big organization like JLL. And I think that's something that a lot of brands can take away and learn from. So that's really fascinating to know that you're doing that within the company. And it'd be great in the future to hear some success stories of that, because there's bound to be loads from that. Really, really interesting. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your industry currently. I mean, obviously, every single industry has been impacted in some way by the pandemic. And even before that as well, different industries experience different challenges. But what are the biggest challenges in your industry currently?
Well, I think from a customer perspective, definitely, and it's probably not just in my industry, but in all industries, is that there is almost a dichotomy. On the one hand, you have customers that are expecting relevant messages, and they expect to be heard and understood deeply by brands. But on the other hand, they want privacy. And so this is very hard to reconcile, because how can you be ultra personal, ultra relevant if you can collect customer data, which is what will probably soon happen in the sort of cookie-less environment that sort of looming among us. And so I think there is actually lots to be optimistic about. I think that with the death, if you want, of the third-party cookie, there will be almost a renaissance of loyalty programs and first-party cookies. So you will actually, as a brand, you probably have less information about customers, but it will be far more relevant, far more specific, and that will again enable for these relevant experiences. This is I think it's a very important topic in our industry, especially if you think about capital markets, investors. Typically these individuals care about privacy a lot. These are not probably like the average consumer for like a fast-moving consumer good or a consumer electronics good. The level of expectations in terms of privacy is incredibly high, but equally high is the expectation of a sort of a white gloves and a tailor-made approach. So again, we are very different, but equally very similar to a consumer company, because the customer wants to be treated as the individual, as the unique individual that he or she actually is, but they don't want to give us enough information. And so that's why I said renaissance for loyalty programs, because I think it's a fantastic opportunity to almost renegotiate the pact with the consumer and say, look, we're not going to gather any more information about you when you browse on third-party websites. We respect your privacy, but when you are on our properties, when you are on our digital touch points on our physical stores, would you please agree to share your preferences, share your history, your purchasing history, etc. And maybe in some cases it would be even relevant to join a loyalty program. And this way you can actually add, as a company, as a brand, you add value. You add value to that relationship. And if you are able to articulate the narrative effectively, the user will see that added value and will be willing to share the information, potentially even more information that he or she would share with a third party, because once the trust is established, they might actually share more. I think all of us can do this exercise. Think about the brands you love, and I'm sure you will probably be willing to share more with them than you would with Facebook. So it's absolutely natural. We just need to change mindset and move from a mindset where we almost outsource the understanding of our customers to third-party agencies and platforms, and now actually reclaim that, bring it back into the company with first-party data and loyalty programs.
Interesting. I guess it's going back to putting yourself in that customer's shoes, and seeing things from their point of view, and also viewing yourself as a customer and knowing what you would want to share and wouldn't want to share, what you'd be comfortable with. Interesting. So do you have any exciting projects coming up at all? I'd really like to give our viewers kind of an insight into what's going on at JLL.
I think there is obviously lots of exciting projects. I think we can all agree that the pandemic really catapulted us 10 years into the future. And as a company that is working in obviously the real estate space, with the purpose of making the world a better place, thanks to our impact into real estate, there is so much going on, around sustainability, around the future of our cities, about regeneration. I mean, the agenda is definitely very busy. I think a common denominator and a technology that has been around for a while, but now has really reached maturity, especially in business-to-business environments, is account-based marketing. And we're really working very hard to make sure that we embed account-based marketing in literally everything we do. Back to my previous point about privacy and how hard it is and it's going to be to sort of gather customer information. It's incredibly important to make sure that we make the most of the little we know. And account-based marketing really enables us to target with tailored messages, individual brands or companies with a story that is consistent with our brand and our arching narrative, but is at the same time incredibly relevant to them and the moment the company is actually going through. And again, reason why I say there's never been a more exciting time to be in marketing is because modern marketing today is all about combining marketing with data and technology. And I think that account-based marketing is probably one of the best representation of this intersection, because many look at ABM as a technology. It's not really a technology. Yes, of course, it's a platform. There is a technology piece, but I don't think you would think about Google search, for instance, as a technology. Now it's so much bread and butter, our marketing plans that we simply consider it as a channel. And similarly, I think with account-based marketing is a channel. Yes, it's a technology fueled by data, but ultimately it's all about marketing. It's about taking your marketing plan, taking your audiences, and making sure that you are slotting all these accounts into the right place and exposing them to the right message. And you do that at scale, reaching out, the highest number of accounts with all the different variations in terms of, decision makers within these companies. And the potential, if you think about it, is just huge potential to reach all the decision makers. And that is obviously what we have been working on for a few years, and what we think is going to be literally like one of the key elements of any successful B2B marketing team.
Interesting. That brings me on to my last question, but I think you've kind of answered it already. I was going to ask what's next for your industry and any future trends, but is there anything that you'd add to that? Anything that you can see forthcoming in next year, the next 5 years or so?
Well, for sure, I think that sustainability was already obviously a huge theme, and already sort of front page before the pandemic. As I said, the pandemic catapulted us 10 years into the future, and hopefully the silver lining of the horrible 18 months we've been going through will be a very strong and committed focus on sustainability. I truly believe that is going to be the case. And for our industry, if you think about it, the built environment contributes for, I think, almost 40% of the overall emissions. So the built environment altogether has a huge responsibility and role to play in addressing the climate emergency. I think, generally speaking, there's been a shift from sustainability being a desire to sustainability moving into the delivery phase. So it's not just about, oh yes, we should do this, we should do this. It's not just talking the talk. Now it's actually about walking the talk. And what's interesting is that lots of organizations, lots of big brands, even before the pandemic, made very, very clear commitments in public forums. Companies that said, we will be net zero by 2023, 2030, 2040, you name it. And the clock's ticking. And I think for our industry, it's going to be very important to actually align plans against those ambitions, because without plans, you will get to those milestones with in trouble, without having achieved that net zero vision. And so I think it's all good, because it's good for the planet that we are now talking about sustainability on delivery terms rather than just a desire. It's good for the business, because I think that businesses that will be on top of the climate agenda will lead the pack. I'm sure that sustainability will be literally a sort of a make it or break it sort of strategic element for any large organization going forward. And it's good for us marketeers, because we can actually leverage our talents, our storytelling as a force for good, and to again push forward the sustainability conversation. If you think, for instance, that the work has been done in some countries that are particularly advanced on the agenda, like for instance in the UK. In the UK, you have the consumers that are very often actively avoiding certain brands that are not aligned to the sustainability agenda, that are simply talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk, and vice versa. They are very loyal to brands that actually have embraced sustainability and make choices about sustainability that are real choices. And so you will just see this, become a sort of a common denominator across geographies, across markets, and across industries. So it's not going to be about consumer goods, but it's going to be like investors will prefer to invest with companies that have a clear, transparent sustainability agenda and background versus investing in companies that don't. So yeah, incredibly exciting times ahead, I think.
Amazing. Lots of things that we've learned from the past year or so as well that, like you said, have changed us for the good and can hopefully continue to change us for the good. Really, really interesting stuff. Thank you so much, Francesco. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. It's been lovely to see you, and thanks again for sharing your journey and your insights.
Thank you for having me.